For my coverage of the second season of Survivor, the Australian Outback, I've decided to start with the episode recaps and reviews so that we'll have a baseline to begin with. I went into a lot more detail with this season than the previous one, so I'm going to split it into two videos, this one covering the pre-merge. This season has some controversial figures, so as I'm talking about the episodes, I'll act as if they're just characters on the show, but then once I address them as they get voted out, then I might bring up the controversies about them and how that changes my view on them. There's a lot to cover still, even with it being split into two, so let's hop right into episode 1. We open the season with all the castaways being brought in on a plane. We see some are getting sick from this ride. As they exit the plane, Jeff introduces us to the two tribes, Kucha and Ogakor. Each castaway is given a short introduction. Each tribe will have to make a hike to where their camps will be. On the way, we are shown some of the personalities a little bit more. The Kucha tribe is being led by Deb, which rubs some people the wrong way, seeing her as bossy. Jeff from Kucha, who I will refer to as Varner going forward as to not confuse him with the host of the show, says that he's been feeling sick ever since the plane ride and is just focusing on not throwing up. The Ogakor tribe is being led by Keith, who runs up ahead to find their camp. Colby says he likes how hard it is right from the beginning since he can see what everyone is made of. They each get to their camps and get to work. Mike and Roger take charge of the Kucha camp, with some people not liking the way Mike is making decisions. Keith and Jerry are shown disagreeing multiple times, introducing that they will not see eye to eye. The first night at Kucha, Kimmy is loud, which Varner and Deb don't appreciate. Next, they have their first immunity challenge. At first, it's close, but Ogakor pulls ahead, and Kucha completely falls apart. Back at Kucha camp, names are being thrown out. Both Mike and Kimmy have rubbed people the wrong way already, but their names don't really come up. That leaves us with Roger, who is older and seen as a liability for challenges. Deb, who is just rubbing some people the wrong way because she can't seem to fit in with the group. And Varner, who has been feeling sick. At Tribal Council, Jeff asks Roger if anyone has stepped up as the leader, to which Roger tells him Mike has. They go to vote, and Deb is the first person voted out. So my thoughts on Deb is that Deb came across to me the same way it appears she did for the members of her tribe, a little bossy and strong-willed. It's unfortunate what happened to her with her life being exposed after being on the show, but she should have been aware that that was a possibility from being on TV to begin with. So for my review for this episode, it's a pretty good opening, though the focus is pretty heavily on the Kucha camp and very little to do with the players that will eventually make it to the end. What is presented to us, though, is good, and from a production standpoint, it is a clear step up from the previous season. I give episode 1 a score of 8 out of 10. Episode 2 opens at the Kucha camp. Mike is up early cooking rice, which Varner notices. Nobody likes that he just started cooking food without the whole tribe. He also started cooking it way too early, and it came out as mush. Mike decides he will then be the provider so everyone can be full and starts fishing. Over at Ogakor, they are also having food troubles. Keith, the gourmet chef, can't seem to cook rice, so Jerry starts making tortillas for everyone. The friction between Keith and Jerry is definitely building. Meanwhile, Kel is trying to fish for Ogakor, but nobody believes he can do it. We get a great editing moment of Mitchell talking about there not being any fish in the river, but it then cuts to a shot of fish swimming nearby. We get a really cool reward challenge where they have to jump off a cliff and swim down the river with a crate. Roger is worried because he can barely swim and is afraid of heights. Roger overcomes his fears, but Ogakor still wins the blankets. Back at Ogakor, Jerry believes she saw Kel chewing on beef jerky, which upsets everyone because they think he is holding out food on the rest of them. It's never shown definitively whether he did or not, but everyone except Marilyn believes it's true. Kel overhears them talking about it and tries to explain, but doesn't do himself any favors, as he doesn't seem very convincing. Back at Kucha, Mike caught some fish, and we get a lot of confessionals about how Mike is grandstanding and enjoys the limelight. They then pray, and Mike thanks God for making him the leader. Only Mike really believes that, though. The immunity challenge is a gross food eating one, which concerns Kimmy as she won't eat certain animals. During the challenge, Kimmy refuses to eat some brains. Luckily for her, Tina is unable to get down some tripe. Kimmy and Tina then face off in eating a mangrove worm, which Kimmy has no problem eating, and Kucha wins immunity. For Tribal Council, the players on the block seem to be Keith and Jerry for each getting on each other's nerves, Tina for losing the challenge, and Kel for the beef jerky incident and just not fitting in well. At Tribal Council, Kel votes for Jerry, but everyone else votes for Kel. My thoughts on Kel are that he seems like a nice but definitely introverted person who probably shouldn't have been on TV. As for the beef jerky incident, I like to believe that he really did have beef jerky because it's more fun that way. And based on post-game interviews, a lot of the other castaways seem to wholeheartedly believe it. My review for the episode, despite a lot of food talk in this episode, I think it was a lot of fun. The editing is great with the fishing and also with Mike's ego trip. The reward challenge was also spectacular, and I don't think we'll ever see anything like that on the show from now on. Or not from now on, in recent years. We're also starting to see more of the personalities on Ogakor come out. Really, the only member of Ogakor we haven't gotten much from yet is Amber. Marilyn, Colby, Jerry, and Mitchell all get some great confessionals in this episode, and the whole beef jerky incident is hilariously awkward. Episode 2, I give a score of 9 out of 10. Episode 3, at the Kucha camp, Mike is really pushing that they need more food. He wants to go out hunting for a pig. Everyone else thinks this is dumb and a waste of time, and that he might lose their knife in trying to do that. At Ogakor, they also are wanting more food, but don't know what they can do for it. Tree Mail comes, and it's a reward challenge for fishing gear. Each tribe chooses their strongest member who will have to bear the weight of buckets filled with water. Mike is chosen for Kucha and Colby for Ogakor. They each get all of the buckets placed, which Jeff says is over 400 pounds. Mike's pole then snaps, so they have to redo it, but this time it's a timed 5-minute challenge just to see who can get more buckets on, and Ogakor ends up winning. They get the fishing gear and are able to finally catch some fish. Keith cooks it, and everyone says it's the best food they've tasted. But everyone was also watching, so they know how to cook it themselves, and Keith's stock hasn't risen at all. At Kucha, Kimmy is working hard to keep everyone hydrated, but she hasn't made any close bonds, so she is still at risk. Nick is seen as lazy, and he even admits it's part of his strategy to lay low and not overexert himself. Varner and Alicia go off to talk strategy and are trying to decide who they could take with them to the end. At Ogakor, we see Marilyn and Tina bonding, and Colby and Jerry flirting. Everyone else also notices what's going on with Colby and Jerry and wonder if it's real or just gameplay. Jerry says she would have no problem voting out Colby if she has to, and the editors cut to shots of spiders setting her up as Survivor's first Black Widow. At the Immunity Challenge, it is a grueling obstacle course where the entire tribe is tied together. Marilyn struggles for Ogakor, and Roger struggles for Kucha, but they push him to the end and come up with the win. On the voting block for Ogakor is Marilyn for being older and slower and struggling during the challenge, and Mitchell for being worn out and weak. At Tribal Council, Jeff asks them about relationships. Colby, Mitchell, Keith, and Tina give vague non-answers, but Marilyn says how tied she is to both Tina and Colby, calling Tina a constellation. And Jerry says she's made stronger bonds with Amber, Mitchell, and Colby. After all is said and done, Marilyn is voted out, and she gives her Mad Dog hat to Amber, making her the Mad Puppy. So my thoughts on Marilyn: even though Marilyn was only in 3 episodes and barely even shown in the first, she made a great impression. She seems like such a wonderful spirit, and it's no wonder they tried to give her her own show after with the show Mad Dog 911. This episode, for my review, is that it really sticks out to me, and I remember watching it live as a kid. This episode showcases how great a character Marilyn is, and how ruthless Tina can be, and is the first notable moment for Amber. It also, in ways, advances the strategy with Varner and Alicia discussing who they could beat at the end, much before the GOAT strategy ever really was truly implemented. Maybe some nostalgia goes into how I feel about this episode, but I really think it's a fantastic one, and I give this episode a score of 10 out of 10. Episode 4. This episode starts with some drama at Ogakor. Tina and Keith are planning to go fishing. They get everything ready just before leaving. Jerry, Mitchell, and Amber take the boat. Jerry recognizes that she likely painted a target on her back by admitting who she was aligned with. Keith has now decided that rather than trying to win, his goal is now to make sure Jerry loses. The reward challenge is to win some chickens. Kimmy doesn't like the idea of killing chickens, but knows she needs to win over some favor within the tribe, so she will do her best at the challenge. And with that, Kucha wins. With the reward of chickens, Mike feels his place at the tribe has been diminished, so he wants them to finish off all the chickens as quickly as possible. At Ogakor, the wildfires are burning nearby, which concerns them, but they feel safe due to the river and think that it might flush out some wildlife for them to hunt. Tina is trying to stir up something with Colby and Mitchell to get them to turn against Jerry. Mitchell isn't budging on it, but Colby might waver. So Jerry goes to Colby to try and reassure their alliance, along with Amber. Back at Kucha, Nick spots a pig in the water, which Mike then chases down and stabs with a knife. He then puts its blood on his face. It all makes him look really psychotic and disturbing. They are glad Kimmy wasn't around, and Varner warns her that a lot of meat will be brought into the camp soon. The others all appreciate Mike for providing them with food. The immunity challenge is an Outback survival trivia, which Alicia struggles to get any questions right until the tiebreaker when she finally answers correctly to win the immunity for Kucha. With Tribal Council ahead, Jerry, Mitchell, and Amber want to target Keith, while Keith and Tina are going either for Mitchell or Jerry, leaving Colby in the middle. During her voting confessional, Tina tells us that the plan changed on the way there, and they're voting for Mitchell. It ends in a 3-3 tie between Keith and Mitchell, so they each get a chance to make their cases. Keith says he feels strong and will work hard for the tribe, while Mitchell, being caught off guard, says he feels weak and understands there isn't much reason to keep him. They re-vote, and once again it's a tie, but Mitchell had a previous vote against him, so he is voted out on the deadlock. My thoughts on Mitchell: it seems like he's a nice guy, and he had some good confessionals, and he seemed pretty smart for the game too. He just wasn't built for Survivor. He is 7 feet tall and skinny. A body that tall burns a lot of calories quickly, and you could tell he was worn out very soon into the game. Even while he was walking up to the vote, you could see that that was a struggle for him. My review for this episode is also very memorable with the killing of the pig and the wildfires, but it doesn't feel as satisfying to watch as the previous one. The plan to vote off Mitchell happening off camera also doesn't help, and I have to wonder what happened on the hike to tribal council to cause that change in voting. For episode 4, I give it a score of 8 out of 10. Episode 5 starts at the Ogakor camp with the smoke rolling in from the nearby wildfires. They're still recovering from the previous tribal council, with Jerry and Amber now realizing Colby isn't as loyal to them as they originally thought. At Kucha, Kimmy voices her concerns over the consumption of chicken, which Alicia doesn't appreciate, and they start an argument which ends with Alicia saying an iconic line, "I will always wave my finger in your face." The rest of the camp also notices how dirty Kimmy has gotten, and she tells us that she refuses to bathe because the water is gross. The next day, they have a reward challenge, which Kucha wins, leaving Ogakor feeling devastated and Amber crying and saying she's tired of losing. With Kucha winning soap and shampoo, they are excited that Kimmy will finally be clean. The next day, they have an immunity challenge, which Ogakor works very well together to finally win and send Kucha to tribal council. At Kucha, everyone seems to be on board with voting out Kimmy, though Roger and Elizabeth bring up Alicia for how bossy and argumentative she is. At tribal council, however, Kimmy is voted out 6-1, with her vote going to Varner for some reason. Kimmy is our first Australian Outback player voted out that will eventually return in another season. I liked Kimmy's integrity in not giving up her morals for the game, and not backing down to Alicia, who does seem like she could be quite intimidating. The not bathing thing is pretty gross, though. My review for this episode, this one felt like the most standard episode of the season so far, and Kimmy's boot was very obvious, though that just means the editors did a good job of telling the story that was important for this episode. It was nice to finally see a little bit more out of Amber, too. I give episode 5 a score of 7 out of 10. Episode 6, our final episode of the pre-merge. We open with Kucha returning to camp in a storm. They're in for a miserable night. The next morning, Mike starts a new fire as theirs went out in the rain the previous night. The tribe knows they still have the numbers advantage and are looking forward to winning the next immunity so they can come into the merge up in numbers. Over at Ogakor, Amber and Jerry are talking about food and chocolate in particular. Jerry is substituting thoughts of sex for chocolate, which makes Colby very uncomfortable. Later, Jerry finds some tomatoes and decides to cook everyone fried green tomatoes. Keith makes comments on everything she does and says they came out terrible, even though nobody really seems to complain, other than Keith. Tina has had enough of their bickering and tells them to stop it or they'll get a timeout. At Kucha, they discovered a new food of their own, the chicken feed, which they dub as Kucha corn. The reward challenge is for a picnic with Doritos and Mountain Dew. One person from each tribe has to lead the rest of the tribe, who are blindfolded through a series of tasks. We see Kucha practicing while Ogakor just does yoga before it. Jerry is the caller for Ogakor, and Nick is for Kucha. It comes down to the wire with them being within feet of each other at the end, but Kucha wins, causing Colby to splash a bucket of water on Jerry out of frustration. At Ogakor, Colby is taking some time to think about the game. Amber and Tina are talking about college, and Jerry decides to get away from everyone for a bit. Jerry says that she's excited for the merge, as it's a chance for her to get in with the other tribe and shake things up a bit. Over at the Kucha camp, everyone is relaxing when suddenly we hear a loud scream. We hear Nick say to what I have to assume was a producer off screen that Mike is burnt pretty bad. Mike inhaled some smoke and passed out into the fire, which caused the skin to burn off his hands. We see Mike in the water in pain as everyone gathers to try to help him. For the first time ever, we see the Survivor medical team who wrap up Mike's hands and give him drugs to kill the pain. A helicopter is brought in to take him out, and everyone says their last goodbyes. Ogakor receives a tree mail that informs them that someone from Kucha was evacuated and there will be no immunity challenge. At Kucha, we hear from a few players about how Mike's accident has brought them together and inspired them to win. So my thoughts on Mike. This is the first really tough one. I know what Mike did outside of the game, and I think he is an absolutely despicable person. I don't want to go into that here, as that's not what this is about. So if you want to know about it, I suggest you look it up yourself. As a person, he seems completely delusional and is our first case of the Don Quixote type of character, where he's a hero in his own mind, but nobody else sees him that way. It took him being severely injured and drugged up for him to seem like a somewhat normal person. It's terrible what happened to him, but knowing what I know about him, I can't enjoy him on screen. So I was glad to see him go. My review for this episode: this is probably the most memorable episode of Survivor, at least for this season. It really told the world how real it is. As much as I don't like Mike, this episode is expertly crafted. The story of showing Mike tend to the fire in the beginning, which will ultimately be his downfall, is tremendous. All of the reactions from the other players and the music and editing helps convey the emotion very well. Outside of the fire incident, the rest of the episode is also very memorable, with Amber and Jerry's chocolate discussion being very iconic. The sequence of everyone at the Ogakor camp going off and doing their own things was also very cool in how they shot and edited that together. All around, just a phenomenal episode. So episode 6, I give a score of 10 out of 10. And that's it for our pre-merge. Next week, I'll cover the post-merge. So hit like and subscribe if you want to catch that. Thank you for watching.